Greetings, Wizard Apprentices. Welcome to the Papercraft Wizard channel. My name is Kelly, and I'm so excited you're here. This is part 1 of our Easy Beginner mini album. In this video, we will create the cover, binding, and base signatures. The mini album measures 6.5 inches by 6 3/4 inches with a 2-inch spine. Here's a list of the equipment we'll be using for this project. Here is a list of the supplies we will be using in this project. Complete cut guide is available in the description. I've designed this album to be extremely easy for the new beginner. Let's build the cover. We're going to start out with 2 pieces of 110-pound cardstock. This first piece is 6.5 inches by 8 5/8 inches, and we've scored at 1 7/8. Now, if you have a scoreboard, I recommend using the scoreboard to score, but if you don't, you can always measure it out on your craft mat. Use your ruler and score like that. Our second piece of 110-pound cardstock for our cover is 6.5 inches by 8 3/4 inches, and we've scored at 2 inches. The first thing I'm going to do is flip this cardstock over and bend it at the score line. And I'll do the same for the other piece of our cover. So now we have 2 pieces here, and the one that is 1 7/8 inches will fit into the one that is 2 inches. I'm going to take some scissors and I'm going to only slightly miter, which is to cut at an angle here, this little piece. And that's just to make sure that the page doesn't come out of the top of the inside. So this is the inside piece of the spine. And we just want to make sure that when we put that in there, nothing is sticking over the top. And it's not perfect. So now we're going to adhere the 2 pieces together. I'm going to put adhesive on the outside of the smaller piece with the 1 7/8 inch flat. I'm using art glittered glue. So I'm going to add adhesive to the exterior flat on the smaller. So this one has a 1 7/8 inch flat. I'm going all the way around the edges, trying to get close to the edge, and then I'm going to just make sure there's a little bit more in the center there. Now I want to make sure that my pieces are in the right position. So I'm going right up to that score line, but not going over, just right up to it, and adhering my 2.5 inch piece on top of my 1 7/8 inch piece. I'm standing it up just to make sure that it is all straight. And then I'll open it up and use my bone folder to make sure that that glue is nice and secure. So we have built the base of our cover. We have 2 pieces of decorative cardstock. These 2 pieces measure 6 3/8 by 6 5/8. This will be our back cover and this will be our front cover. I always like to dry fit to make sure that we have the proper fit. Another thing I like to do is I like to ink the edges of my paper. This just gives it a little bit more of a finished look. But if you don't have ink, don't worry about it. You can skip it. For this, I used a makeup applicator and some Tim Holtz Distressed Oxide, but any ink can do and any applicator will work. The first thing we're going to do is add adhesive to the back of our cover page. And then we'll put that down right on top of our cover. And I want to make sure it's very even. That's one of the great things about liquid adhesives is they do give you a little bit of wiggle room. So we want to get that on there as straight as possible. And then I'm going to take my bone folder and make sure that that paper is nice and pure. For the back piece, we'll do the same thing. I'm going to add the adhesive to the back of the decorative cardstock all the way around the edge, and then a little in the middle as well. Get that on there, and I'll use my bone folder again to make sure that's nice and secure. The spine piece measures 6 3/8 by 1 7/8. And we'll put that into place. Let's decorate the spine. This is one of the cut apart pieces from the collection I'm using. You can use stickers, or you can use chipboard, or you can even just leave the spine blank if you'd prefer. So what I've done is I've just trimmed out my image to a size that I think will look good on this spine. And then I've cut a piece of the 110-pound cardstock to be just a 1/16 of an inch all the way around bigger than my image. So how I do that is I just measure my image, and then I make my cardstock backer piece 1/8 inch wider and longer. So let's go ahead and adhere that together. We want to try to get it as straight as possible. And then we'll use our bone folder and make sure that's nice and secure. I'm going to add adhesive to the back of the base cardstock, and then we'll adhere that right in the center of the spine. You can use your ruler if you'd like, or you can just eyeball it as I am here. Right, and now our spine is finished. Sometimes I like to use cardstock to pop up images. You can also use foam tape. It's really whatever you prefer and whatever works for that specific project. I have a couple different images here that I want to use for my cover. So it'll look basically like this. I measured my image, and then I cut out my base cardstock, and I'm using the 110-pound cardstock for this to be 1/8 of an inch wider and 1/8 of an inch longer than my decorative image. I'm just going to add some adhesive and adhere it on to the base cardstock. I want to get this image as centered as possible on my base cardstock. All right, and now we're going to adhere this on to the next piece of decorative cardstock. So now we're going to take our configuration here and add it to the final piece of base cardstock. And we want to make sure that's as even as possible, as always. And so we want to get this as even as possible on the cardstock. There's one of our images. My second image is this guy dressed all in green riding a fish. Same thing, I inked up the edges on all of my images, all of the decorative cardstock. And again, that's just taking the ink and moving it along the edges. So now I want to dry fit it to make sure I have it in the right spot. This image is a little bit shorter than it is longer, or shorter than it is wide. So I want to make sure I have my cardstock in the proper direction. We'll add some more adhesive, and then we'll adhere this onto the base cardstock. We want to make sure this image is as centered as possible. And again, we'll just use our bone folder to make sure that that paper is nice and secure. We'll go ahead and adhere this to our next level of decorative cardstock. So now that I've dry fit it, I'll go ahead and add my adhesive. And now I'm dry fitting this to our last piece of base cardstock. Go ahead and add adhesive and then adhere it onto the base cardstock. All right, so now we have our two images for our cover. And so now you could just play with them, decide where you want it to be, what you want it to look like. So I'm going to go ahead and add some adhesive and put my big image down since that's my bottom layer. Once I have that together, I'm going to go ahead and glue these two little pieces of cardstock together. And then I'll glue the other two pieces together. And this is what I'm going to use to pop up this image. It doesn't matter if they're perfectly even or if they're off a little bit because these are going to be hidden. And of course, again, you can always use pop dots or foam tape or whatever other dimensional item you'd like. Now I'm just going to adhere those on there. I'm not putting them super close to the edges. I'm just kind of putting them in about 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch, making sure they're in a good spot, and then trying it out. This probably could use a third piece of cardstock. So I've just got a little bit here. I'm just going to trim that down. Now I'm going to add one more layer. As I mentioned before, it doesn't have to be perfect. This is just on the bottom to make sure that our image is popped up appropriately. We'll dry fit that image onto the album cover and it looks good. So I'm just going to add a little bit of adhesive here where it will connect with our other image. And then I'm going to add adhesive to our little pop-up pieces. And then I think we're just going to put it right about there. I'm going to use my bone folder to make sure that it's nice and secure. All right, and there it is. We've made the cover of our mini album. The next piece we're going to work on is our binding. This binding is 5 7/8 inches by 6 inches. And I've scored this at 1/4 inch, 1 inch, 1 3/4 inch, 2 1/4 inch, 3 inches, 3 3/4 inches, 4 1/4 inches, 5 inches, and 5 3/4 inches. And that's all scored from the 6-inch side. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to fold at the scored lines as I'm going to show you. First one is going to go this way. Our next one is going to go the opposite way. And I will show you why we're doing it that way right now. So what we're going to do is this will be adhered to the album. This is where we'll connect our pocket pages, is on these little tabs here. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep on folding at our score line. As you'll notice, we have 3/4 inch tabs that we're going to adhere our pocket pages to. However, we only want to adhere them about a 1/2 inch down. So that should leave us with about 1/4 inch of cardstock, and we'll talk more about that as we go. So what we should have is we should have 3 mountains, 2 large valleys in the middle, and 2 small valleys on the outside. And we will adhere those together so that they look like this. So I'm just going to go ahead and add my adhesive and then adhere them together. Use my bone folder to make sure that that is adhered and that it's nice and secure. And then once we have that one adhered together, we'll go ahead and move on to the next. Just add the adhesive and then use the bone folder to make sure it's nice and secure. We will be mitering these edges, so there's no need to make sure you get right up to the end on those edges. There we go. And we'll go ahead and adhere this last one together. For this piece, I'm using the 65-pound cardstock. So now we're going to go ahead and miter these edges. Now, as I mentioned, we're only going to adhere down to about 1/4 inch. So I'm just going to eyeball what a 1/4 inch is. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can always use a ruler and make a little tick mark. I'm going to do that for all 3 of our tabs. This makes it easier for our pages to slide over our binding. So now we're going to adhere this configuration right onto our spine, and I want to make it as centered as possible. I'm going to use my liquid adhesive, and I do want to make sure that it has good coverage, as this is what is going to be holding all of our pages in. Right, so again, we want to make sure that is nice and even. Oops. Nice and centered on the vertical and the horizontal. And if you made a little mistake like me, just go ahead and wipe that off. And we'll use our bone folder to make sure that this is really nice and secure on there. The main reason that I leave 1/4 inch at the bottom is just so that our pages can easily lie flat when we're looking through our book. Great, so now we can go ahead and add on our inside decorative pieces. These are both 6 3/8 by 6 5/8. So just as we did with the front, we want to make sure that these are dry fit. I'm going to go ahead and add some adhesive and then adhere this to our album base. And then we'll use our bone folder to make sure that's nice and secure. So we want to make sure we stay at least a 1/16 inch away from those score lines. I'm adding the adhesive and then I'll adhere this to our base. Our base pages are going to be 6 inches by 6 inches. I have 6 pieces of cardstock, and this cardstock measures 6.5 by 6. And I've scored at 1/2 inch on the 6.5 inch side. For the pages, I used the 65-pound cardstock. Another thing we're going to do is we're just going to miter these little corners. It doesn't have to be a lot, just a bit. We'll do this for all 6 of these pieces of cardstock. Now we're going to take 2 of those pieces and adhere them together to create our pocket page. And we'll be adhering them like this so that there will be a pocket created. I'm going to go ahead and add my adhesive to the little 1/2 inch caps we've created. I want to line this up as straight as possible. And then I always just kind of check to make sure there's no extra glue that's going to close that up. We'll go ahead and add adhesive to our other flap. Sometimes I get a little too crazy with the glue. You probably don't need that much, but I like to make sure things stick. There is such a thing as using too much. So there's our pocket page, and we will go ahead and make 2 more of these. Now we've completed our cover, our binding, and our base pages. Please subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and hit the bell icon for notifications. This concludes part 1 of our Easy Beginner Mini Album tutorial. Thank you for watching and happy crafting.